These are in listen-only mode.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us today for our Hotline Skills and Advocacy webinar. My name is Tamara Massett, and I am the Coalition's Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator. And I'm going to hopefully give you guys some information on the necessary skills to effectively advocate for victims who are calling our state domestic violence and sexual assault hotlines. So we are going to go ahead and jump right into it just to kind of set the tone for the next hour and a half that we're going to be together. If at any time anybody has any questions or I say something that you aren't quite sure about, please feel free to jump in, type in your questions in the chat box in your control panel, and we'll answer them as we go. I'll answer them as we go. So please, if you have any questions or anything you want to say at any time, just jump on in that chat and we will address it as they come in. So here we go. All right. I think here we go. My screen's not moving. There we are. Who we are. So the mission of the Oklahoma Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault is to organize and mobilize member programs to prevent and eliminate sexual and domestic violence and stalking in the state of Oklahoma and in Indian country. And again, c'est moi, that is me, Tamara Massett, your Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator at the Coalition. And just a little bit before we get started, this is what we're going to go over, and this is what we're hoping to achieve with today's information. So overview, we're going to briefly go over FIPSA and the National Domestic Violence Hotline. We're going to go over the goals and the goals of domestic and sexual violence crisis hotlines. And then we are going to talk about Oklahoma domestic violence, domestic and sexual violence hotlines. So what we're going to achieve, I hope, through these objectives are we're going to identify and discuss critical skills needed to effectively and empathetically engage with victim callers. We're going to recognize the nuances between phone advocacy and direct person-to-person advocacy. And then we're going to hopefully integrate identified skills and information in order to demonstrate the competencies and commitment to providing survivor-centered advocacy. So that's what we're going to tackle today. And for all the CDS VRP folk that are tuning in right now or will be later, the CDS VRP secret word is survivor-centered. Take it down, jot it down, write it down, remember it. Survivor-centered is the secret word. Okay, so jumping on into it, here's our brief overview of our FIPSA and the National Domestic Violence Hotline overview. So again, this is going to be brief because we all know about FIPSA, and if not, we have another webinar in our library that you guys can check out for more information. But so for FIPSA, first passed in Congress in 1984, it is the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, and it is the primary funding, federal funding stream dedicated to the support of emergency shelter and related assistance for victims of domestic violence and their children. So, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program is committed to, and this is key information here, to kind of set up what the goals are for the national hotline. So FIPSA is committed to providing shelter and other supportive services for victims and their children, coordinating the statewide improvements within local communities, social service systems, and prevention and intervention programming through state coalitions, i.e. the Oklahoma Coalition, and other PHPSA state administrators. The program is aimed at increasing public awareness about the prevalence of domestic violence, dating violence, and family violence, and supporting local and community-based domestic violence programs with specialized technical assistance. So those are the main things that PHPSA is committed to doing. Now, for the purposes of the domestic violence hotline, PHPSA provides the funding for ongoing operation for the 24-hour national toll-free hotline. The hotline is an immediate link for life-saving help for victims, and it provides information, assistance to adults and youth victims of family violence, domestic violence or dating violence, family and household members, and other persons such as domestic violence advocates, government officials, law enforcement agencies, and the general public. So none of the information that's coming from the hotline in terms of providing information and resources is secret. It's available to any and everyone, professionals and non-professionals, victims alike. So it is a valuable, valuable resource, and PHPSA is the funding source that keeps it going. Now, the hotline is the gold standard, and this is why. So as you've noticed in the last couple of slides, information for the hotline and the graphics, that is the phone number right there for the national hotline. But this is why the hotline is the gold standard. It is an immediate link for life-saving information to the victims. Okay, so this is the things that we've already said, but again, I just wanted to point out that the slides do have that information about the hotline that you guys can connect with at your own time. So why is the hotline the standard? Well, check this out. Here it is. Over the last 20 years, the hotline and Love of Respect, which is, with the National Domestic Violence Hotline, they have answered more than 4 million calls, chats, and texts from people seeking help around issues of domestic violence and dating abuse. 4 million calls, okay? That means they're doing something right, right? So here is what's going on, what they're doing. The hotline is 100% confidential, meaning they're not going to ask you any type of identifying information that could potentially be used for any bad purposes, other than collecting demographic information that is used to for grant reporting purposes, essentially. But again, that information is 100% confidential, and callers have the option of not disclosing that information, and that is completely fine. Hotline advocates go through a 2-week, 60-hour, in-depth training that includes interactive, hands-on classroom instruction and discussion, online module training, and live phone and digital services role-playing scenarios, in addition to the proficiency tests to ensure mastery of skills before answering any calls. And so those practice sessions are critical and crucial to the advocates before they get onto the line. And I just want to let you guys know that I had the opportunity last year to go through that training at the National Domestic Violence Hotline in Austin, and it is an amazing, fabulous, very in-depth training that just makes all the difference. I also have several years of doing crisis hotline volunteering back in the day, so it's the training is invaluable information that you get. So also, the hotline is intended to be used not only by people experiencing domestic violence, but also people who feel that they are beginning to show signs of abusing their partner or being on the end of receiving abusive interactions with partners. Hotline advocates help callers by asking questions to identify red flags and teach the caller techniques on how to calm down is not necessarily the best way to put that, but how to safety plan around their issues that they're experiencing with intimate partner violence. And again, the hotline is live 24/7. It's available in more than 170 different languages. And the hotline also answers calls from undocumented immigrants anywhere in the United States. Again, all confidential. So these things right here are what make the National Domestic Violence Hotline the gold standard to hopefully emulate in local programs that have hotlines and operate hotlines. I also know that they have a lot bigger budget than a lot of local programs, so they are able to do a lot more with a lot more resources that they have. But we will address those things. So, what we are going to do next is talk about why the National Domestic Violence Hotline is the gold standard. What are the skills? So we are going to identify and discuss said critical skills that advocates or anybody really who is working with victims, whether that's directly or indirectly, because we all know if you are encountering victims of domestic or sexual violence or human trafficking, you don't necessarily have to be just a shelter advocate to take those calls. Anybody who's calling into your programs should be able to speak with somebody who can provide assistance, the necessary assistance that they need to get to safety. So first things first, what's the point? Okay, well, here it is. The goals of all domestic and sexual violence crisis lines in the state of Oklahoma are to provide assistance with safety planning, crisis intervention, emergency shelter, and advocacy to all victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking, right? While providing non-judgmental, compassionate, and survivor-centered informed resources and information. Now, I do want to let y'all know that this is kind of a mashup of what the Oklahoma Attorney General's Office, Victim Services Unit, describes for all of our crisis hotlines in the state of Oklahoma. However, I added just a few little things in here to drive it home that our goal is to provide survivor-centered, informed resources and information, okay? And while providing that in a non-judgmental and compassionate way. So those things are crucial. So going back to that question, first things first, what's the point? Well, being mission-driven is the point. Remembering why we do the work we do, because it is answering a call, literally, to saving someone's life. That's the point. So what should callers expect when calling our hotlines? Hint, it's simple, and this is why it's simple. Every caller should expect, without exception, okay, without exception, an active and attentive listener, an empathetic listener, a person listening without judgment, a person who is trauma-informed, a person that understands cultural humility, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, someone who cares and wants to help, someone who has been trained in not they, dynamics of dating and domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking as mandated by Oklahoma standards and is knowledgeable about local community resources. So just tying it all into what we've already kind of said just a few minutes ago, being knowledgeable, right? And the things that are already listed at the top are things that you don't necessarily even need to go through any type of formal training. because anybody can be an active and attentive listener, right? Are you a parent of a 6-year-old, 10-year-old, 30-year-old? You're listening, right? And not blowing them off. Anybody can listen to somebody and care, genuinely care about what they're saying and feel for their experiences, whether that's good or bad, positive, negative. We can all listen without judgment, okay? Now, trauma-informed, that's a jargon, right? But just kind of knowing appropriate ways to engage and interact with somebody who has gone through a traumatic experience. And we're gonna hit on that a little further in just a second. A person that understands cultural humility. Again, this is something we'll talk about. But in short, checking your privilege. Okay, that's what that means, essentially. Check your privilege. Not everybody is coming from the same place. We are all starting at different starting points in life, in DV situations, in any situation. We're not starting from the same playing field. And we have to remember that. Cultural humility. Again, somebody who cares and just wants to help. Why are we doing what we do? We certainly are not in the nonprofit business or providing services, social services, because we all want to get rich, right? Because it's not happening. We do it because we care and we want to help, and it needs to be done. And again, here, we need to be trained in the dynamics of the field. Bottom line, there's no getting around that. We need to have that training. So while we can do all these things, the first things without necessarily having that training, at the bottom line, at the end of the day, we do need this training in the dynamics of dating and domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and all the other things that are mandated by Oklahoma standards. So, it essentially boils down to asking yourself, how would I want to be treated if I was experiencing a traumatic situation and needed help? When I encounter situations I've never experienced or have never received help and don't know where to begin, how would I want to be treated? Those are two simple questions. So what is the answer? And this is not rhetorical, so y'all take a second and jot down some of what you think in the chat box, if you don't mind, just so we can kind of see what's going on and what you guys are thinking. I'm going to leave this up for a second. How would you want to be treated if you were experiencing a traumatic situation and needed help? Would you want somebody? No? Okay. Anybody? Okay, well, we will come back to that. I think we are having technical difficulties here. There we go. Okay. All right. So think about those questions and talk to me in just a second if nobody is going to jot anything down in the chat. So, survivor-centered advocacy. For victims of intimate partner violence, safety also means freedom from the controlling tactics of an abusive partner and elimination of the risk the abusive partner creates for the victim and their children. Survivor-centered advocacy responds to all victims in all situations. It is a pragmatic approach that is guided by a broad definition of safety and each victim's priorities, circumstances, and decisions. This allows advocates to help make things better without believing they have failed if victims are not immediately and completely safe. So essentially what I'm saying, and in short, This means the victim is the expert of their lived experiences, right? They know the dynamics of their relationship. They are living it. They are experiencing it. And they are coming to us because they need help. They need assistance. They need to get away, and it's our job to provide the best means of resources to provide for that safety, right? That is what being survivor-centered means in providing that type of advocacy, where it's a partnership. Advocates don't know it all. We don't know it all, right? We don't know the experience of every single person that's coming through the doors or calling the hotlines. And so we have to meet them halfway and let them know that we know that it is a team effort that is going to make providing for their safety work, or helping to provide for their safety, I should say. So some of these skills, we've talked about them. We've kind of boiled it down to it being as simple as thinking and connecting with, how would I want to be treated if I was experiencing a situation that I had no experience with, whether that's a DV situation, sexual assault, or what have you. So these are the skills that I believe makes it so much of a better process for victims when calling our hotlines. So again, going back to that mission-driven, we need to be mission-driven by our programs that we are in, and by the standards of services that we would expect to receive if the situation were reversed or you've experienced it. So knowing the culture of your program, knowing the culture of the area that you're in, your community, and being able to remain objective and ethical while fulfilling the mission of your program and the hotline. That's housed within the program, right? So being able to follow your code of ethics, knowing the policies of confidentiality, knowing the organization's policies, knowing where to refer to if you have questions about your program or the mission of the program or the hotline. Next, we need to know how to be active listeners, right? That's one of the main things. The crucial thing of working in a hotline is being an active listener. So knowing how to actively and attentively communicate. What are some of those things to do that when you are on a phone call and not necessarily face-to-face with somebody, and they can't see your facial expressions, or they don't know how to interpret something because they're not right in front of you, using things like minimal encouragers, right? So I can't hear y'all, but y'all can hear me. And in order for me to know that I'm staying engaged with you, I'm still asking things that are kind of rhetorical, right? Like right there. I know I'm not getting an answer, but it's letting y'all know that I'm still staying engaged. So being an active listener and using verbal and nonverbal communications. And so that's also addressing people who may have disabilities who are still going to be reaching out to the hotlines. And how are you going to connect and let them know that you are listening? Because when you listen, you're building a rapport, right? And when you establish that connection, that rapport with your listener, with the caller, they're going to be more inclined to talk to you and tell you what is going on. And you will there be able to better give them the information and resources that they may need in order to get to a safe place that may be your program or another program within the community. So using appropriate communication methods to establish the rapport. And that is where it comes in with being empathetic, okay? Being empathetic and caring, listening. That's how you show you care. When you can't, right, in person, you listen. So communicate with empathy, with respect, with warmth, and genuine interest in the caller. Be respectful. Don't cut them off. You may think you know where the conversation is going, but, and you very may well know because you have a million calls just like it, but no call is the same, and no response is going to be the same from the last, right? So be respectful. You need to make sure that you're not giving, say, advice. You aren't going to coerce them into a way of thinking. You're wanting to provide options. You want to listen so you know what options may be available to provide, right? And again, in that listening, you want to be judgment-free, or as judgment-free as you can. And again, this will kind of tie in to checking your privilege. So, leading into checking your privilege is being is having cultural humility, understanding what that means. And so being self-aware, i.e. checking your privilege, and recognizing that not everybody is coming from the same starting point, like we said, okay? And a one-size approach does not fit all, and it will not fit all, and it will not provide the safety that everybody needs in some way or other, okay? And so as an example, if you have an African-American woman calling about resources or needing help or information about something, and she's telling you what's going on, and she's using lingo that you may not be familiar with, or she's calling from a certain part of town that may not have the resources available for her to reach out to. Are you going to provide her the same type of resource information that you would to somebody who, say, is living in Edmond and has, a significantly higher income and means to transportation or resources or what have you? No, you're not going to provide her the same resource information because it's not going to be culturally specific for her needs. And so that's what I mean by checking your privilege and being self-aware and recognizing the cultural humility that we all should have when we are talking to victims and when we're working with victims. Recognize that different people have different lived experiences, different groups, minority groups, whatever kind of minority, whether that's a sexual minority, a gendered minority, a racial minority. We are all coming from different places and starting at different points. So recognize that and check your privilege. And don't just think, oh, well, if so-and-so can go here and do this, and that is the same type of opportunity that's available to the next person. And that's not always the case, unfortunately. So be aware of that and be cognizant of those nuances. And so while we're doing those things and we're working through and providing those crisis intervention techniques, we need to recognize that there are different distinctions in crisis intervention work, right? You may receive a phone call from someone who is in immediate danger right then, right there, and the only person or the only resource that they knew to call was the state safe line because they didn't want to call law enforcement for some reason, okay, and whatever reason that may be. They called the state hotline first. It is our job, it's our responsibility to make sure that first that caller is in a safe place to be able to talk. Okay, that is the first step, to make sure that they are in a safe place that they can have the conversation or can be online long enough to let somebody know what's happening and get information and resources and safety plans. Other times, you may get a phone call from somebody who's just needing information, who's just needing a referral resource. So being able to distinguish when there is an immediate need, an immediate crisis versus you're providing resource referral information. And so you need to be able to know and recognize the warning signs, right? Know the policies and the procedures of your program. What does it say? Who can you refer to? Refer to those things and know those policies, because that is how you're going to be able to try to essentially triage these calls. Again, and while doing all of these things, it is the most important to be able to establish a rapport with your caller. Because if you don't have that rapport, you're not going to get anywhere. And trust is going to be broken, unfortunately. So establishing a rapport with the caller or the victim who is needing the information. And so while doing all of those things, you also need to be aware of the intersections of what's going on in the lives of the people who are calling. And so some callers are going to have mental health issues. Some callers may be suicidal. What are the steps and the procedures that your organization or agency has in place to address these types of callers? We also get calls who are just, wanting to talk and hang out and don't have anything to do and just need somebody to listen to them. And it may not be specifically related to a domestic or sexual violence issue. How do you address these calls? How do you address these hard type of calls that may not fall within line? Knowing the local community resources in your area. That's how you're going to address that issue. So being knowledgeable about the resources that are available, both locally, statewide, what have you. And also knowing that you may not have all the information or the skills that you need to provide the type of information that doesn't fall within the line of the stated mission of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. And that's fine, but you need to be able to know where to go to get that information and where those resources are within the community so you can give that information to your callers. That is what is going to build trust and rapport. So, also, we need to know what are the steps and procedures. Do you have a call tree by chance, or a way to essentially triage those types of calls, right? So you're going to provide safety planning. You're doing those lethality assessments to know whether somebody is needing shelter, what type of assistance they are needing, and what type of assistance you can connect them to. And again, the top thing that can't stress enough, and the skills needed to do effective survivor-centered advocacy is active listening and attentive listening. I can't tell you how many times I've received calls, not necessarily here, but how many times I've received a phone call from someone who is just at the end of their rope. trying to get help and information, and they're just being sent around from, referral to referral to referral and not getting anywhere done or getting anything done that they're wanting. And that's because are we providing the information that they need to get to a safe place or to be empowered since they've left a violent situation? Are we giving them all the information that we have? And if we don't have it, why don't we have it? It's our job to get it and to find it. So next, I'm going to jump here. What's going on in Oklahoma? Let's talk about that. So I'm not sure if you can see it so clearly, but I will have this along with the presentation available to everyone before the end of the week, so you have this information and can print it off at your leisure. But these are the latest reports from the National Domestic Violence Hotline on the state of what kind of calls and what's going on in Oklahoma with our hotlines. And this is really telling. The information is very, very, very telling of what we're doing right. And there are some areas of, that are definitely ready for improvement. So just going over this, these are numbers from January through June of 2018. We have answered, according to these numbers that the hotline has collected, there were 776 contacts from Oklahoma. The state ranks 31st in terms of contact volume to the national hotline. Again, all of the hotlines provide crisis intervention, safety planning, referrals, and domestic violence education information. And so, if you look at the charts to see who is contacting our hotlines, these are the ages. Look in the center, victims' ages. Majority of the calls, 41.7%, are ages 25 to 36. Next is, looks like 37 to 45, followed by 46 to 54, then 19 to 24. We have 55 to 63, followed by teenagers 18 and younger, that's 4.2%, and only 3.4% are 64 and over. What are you guys seeing in terms of your call volume? Are you getting this information? And are you providing specific resource information to go with the numbers that we have on file? If not, maybe this is something that programs should consider looking at when addressing issues to their specific hotline. Are you meeting the needs in the community, in your community? Caller type. Most of these calls are victim, survivor, intimate partner violence. Do want to just say that the National Domestic Violence Hotline only, they do answer other calls that aren't necessarily specific to intimate partner violence, but the resource information for sexual assaults or things that aren't directly intimate partner violence are routed to the appropriate hotlines that address those issues. So callers that are experiencing sexual have experienced a sexual assault or rape or something by a non-intimate partner would call the National Sexual Assault Hotline, or RAIN, the Rape and Incest National Network. And so this information is specific to intimate partner violence. But we can see, and we do know that all of those things, all of those issues are intersectional to gendered and sexual violence. So caller ethnicity is also, a key demographic point that goes back to checking your privilege. Not every experience is going to be from a white Caucasian experience or perspective, right? It does show that 66% of the callers are white or Caucasian, but that leaves 5.1 Native American callers, 7.7 other identified callers, 14.3 Black or African American callers, and 7% Latino or Hispanic callers. So knowing that information should be a good indicator that having culturally specific and diverse resources and information is critical to providing the most appropriate survivor-centered advocacy to all persons who are coming through your program doors or picking up the phone to call your crisis hotline. And so the top 10 cities in contact volume, according to these numbers, are Oklahoma City with 27.1%, followed by Tulsa with 18.8%, Norman 4.8%, Edmond 3.2%, Stillwater 2.7%, Lawton with 2.6%, Broken Arrow 2%, Muskogee with 1.7%, Shawnee with 1.7%, and more with 1.7%. And so if you notice, the two biggest metropolitan cities in the state have the highest rates of contact volume, call volume, but that does not capture what is going on out in rural Oklahoma, rural America, Oklahoma. What is going on out there? And you can kind of see just what these numbers are saying. And, that's the time that we should be reading in between the lines. Is this information getting out to these communities that are obviously experiencing rates of domestic and sexual violence in their communities, but the numbers aren't correlating with what we know, right? Why is that? So being able to identify some of these challenges, addressing those challenges by, are we meeting people where they are? Are we providing the culturally specific information and resources that they need? And when I say culturally specific, that's not just meaning race or nationality. That's, rural America as well. Are we meeting the needs of all persons needing assistance and safety when calling our hotlines, including people with disabilities, people who are using, who have English as, not their first language? What are we doing? What's going on in Oklahoma? And I believe that this is a great snapshot to capture and things to look and think about. So we're going to tie it all in a little bit early because I wanted to leave time to really engage and answer any questions that I can, but ask you guys some questions and hopefully get some engagement from y'all. And so we're going to tie it all together. And so we're going to integrate the identified skills and information that we've talked about so far in order to demonstrate competency commitment to providing survivor-centered advocacy. I do want to let you know this has a trigger warning. It is a domestic violence call from a 6-year-old to 911. And I want you to think about how you would approach a call like this if a child or anyone, for that matter, called the hotline, called your hotline, and needed assistance. It is hard to watch and listen. All right. First time I heard that, that was rough. That was pretty rough. No child should ever witness either one of their parents, in any type of domestic violence situation. No child should have to do that, and no child should have to be put in a position to make a phone call like that. But unfortunately, that happens every single day. And unfortunately, we get those phone calls every single day from victims who are trying to connect to services once a situation has escalated to that level, right? So if that woman would have called the program, called your program, maybe not in the heat of a physical altercation like that, but she has decided not to call law enforcement the first, as her first contact. How would you respond to somebody calling your hotline with a situation going on like that? If you can, open that up to your chat, and how would you address it? So let's see. Repeating the question. I said putting that in chat. I'm so sorry. In questions. Answering that and answer your question. Type in your answers in the questions. And the question was, how would you respond? What would you say to a person who had just experienced a situation like the call that we just listened to? What would you tell that mother calling? Because I tell you, we get them here. We get them here at the coalition. What would you do? Would you safety plan with that person? Would you ask, are they in a safe place to talk? Ask them, why did you call the police? Why didn't you call the police? What would you say? How would you provide advocacy, survivor-centered advocacy in that situation? Well, in the event, all right, okay, here we go. We got some answers, okay. Okay, let's see. We have, quite a few. Okay, here we are. All right, let me get them down. First, are you safe? Bonnie said. Second, listen, provide support. Voice concern for her safety. Wish can't hear us. Okay, how about now? We have Sandy saying, I would make sure that they were in a safe place to talk, and if not, help them find a safe place to go to talk and then proceed. Okay. First, want to make sure that her and her kids are safe, and that if they are hurt, get medical attention. I would then offer shelter and resources from our agency. Right. First, making sure the victim is safe. First and foremost. Well, we are talking like Medea. Assess her needs. Does she need shelter? Does she have support? Does she need a protective order? Safety plan. Offer shelter. Additional resources. Exactly. Meeting the caller where they are. Meeting their needs where they are. First step in being survivor-centered, right, is knowing that not every situation is going to be the same, And so not every situation is going to call for the same resources, right? So I'm going to ask a question. What would be a benefit of having, of a caller, of a victim calling, say, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, or calling a local program, calling their local program, say, in Enid, Oklahoma, or in Durant, Oklahoma? What's the benefit? Why would somebody call? Because we know from what we've talked about, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is the gold standard, right? They go through all, their advocates go through all this training. They have all these resources, all this money. Let's just send them to the National Domestic Violence Hotline to get connected, right? No. Well, yes, but no. Folks need to be getting connected to their local community resources. That's why. And that's why it is so important and so vital that, oh, we have some questions. We have some answers. Let me stop it before I get ahead of myself. Sandra said, local resources that are available for persons who do not have to relocate. There we go. Have another one. Resources varying depending on location. Exactly. For those reasons, the local community resources know what's in the local community, right? While the National Domestic Violence Hotline is a fantastic, amazing resource that has resource information and referrals, you know, in the thousands and thousands and thousands across the country. But they may not have all the information for specific local community resources that are able to provide additional support services that may be beyond the scope of what the shelter programs provide, right? And again, that leads to issues of transportation and, you know, all those things that intersect when someone is trying to either leave a situation or get to safety, in both. And so when somebody is calling the local shelter or calling your local program, it's essential to make sure that we are, I don't want to say mirroring, but kind of mirroring those national standards of excellence that's coming from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They have been in existence for over 20 years. Well, almost, yeah, a little over 20 years, and have answered over 4 million calls. Remember, they are doing something right, and it's our job to find out what they're doing and how they're doing it so we can do it in Oklahoma on the same standard level of excellence. If anything, if you take anything away from today's webinar, it's that we have an obligation to all victims of domestic and sexual violence and stalking and dating violence and human trafficking, all those things. We have a responsibility to these victims, to these callers, to these people in need of help and safety. We have an obligation to provide that to them in a way that is meeting them where they are in their circumstance, in their life, in order to provide that survivor-centered advocacy. And we have an obligation to establish rapport with every single caller who is calling all of our hotlines, whether that's your local program or that's the state statewide program hotline. We have an obligation to them as providers in this field to be as empathetic and understanding and checking our privilege and understanding cultural humility in order to provide the best survivor-centered advocacy that's going to meet the needs for safety and being in a safe place and empowering these victims of these traumatic experiences. I don't know how else to break that down than what it is. And it's I know this is probably not the best way to say it, but it's not rocket science, right? It's not rocket science to be empathetic, to be an active and attentive listener. It is not hard to care about the safety and well-being of another person and wanting to be a catalyst and helping to provide that safety and stability to that person and within their life. It doesn't take a lot to do that. It just takes us remembering why we do what we do, and that's being mission driven to meet and exceed the expectations of callers who are calling in needing safety and resources to get to safety. And so I'm going to go back and end with our mission of the Oklahoma Coalition, and that is to eliminate sexual and domestic violence and stalking in the state of Oklahoma and in Indian country. And in order for us to do that, we have to work together with all of the programs and all of social services that are intersecting in the lives of victims who are needing safety and security from domestic and sexual violence. And this is a community effort, and we all need to be able to be survivor-centered in doing that and meeting the goals of our missions and the collective mission of ending domestic and sexual violence. So I'm going to hush up for a minute and open it up to any questions. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? And if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our office, reach out to me. This information, there's a more in-depth presentation of this information that I can make available to anybody who is needing it. And so with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up a tad bit early. My contact information is on the screen, and if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. The CDS VRP secret word, don't forget, is survivor-centered. And with that, I bid you all adieu, and thank you so much for joining us. And the quiz and whatnot will be available before the end of the week, so just hang tight with us as we are continuing to work through some kinks with our coalition manager. But please know that we are receiving your phone calls and emails regarding those issues and working to get those all addressed. And we will have all this information to you guys by Friday. All right? Thank you all so much. Y'all have a great rest of the day.